You're listening to the Potaholics Comedy Network. Potaholics.com.
Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And today we are talking about violence in video games. As always, our main source material is The Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen L. Kent. We are on Chapter 20, titled Mortal Kombat.
All right, so we already talked about the game Death Race, not based on the movie, but this was an arcade game that came out, and that was a game that people would run over skeletons, but everyone thought they were people, so they got all upset about it.
The graphics were not great back then.
Yeah, it was coin-op arcade time, and it was not graphically enough to really make people feel weird. Now, the first game that made people feel weird, and it's the title of the chapter, is Mortal Kombat. So we're going to talk about that. And that game was created by Williams Bally Midway. They're all together at the time. And it was created by Ed Boon and John Tobias while they worked there. And Ed Boon started making games that were football simulations. He made High Impact and Super High Impact. And John Tobias got his start working on games for another guy named Mark Turnell. And Mark Turnell, he made Smash TV and Total Carnage. He also made The Blitz and NBA Jam series. So this guy made a lot of games, but Tobias specifically worked on the game Smash TV and Total Carnage. So in 1990, when Williams asked for a fighting game that could compete with Street Fighter II, John Tobias and Ed Boon rose to the challenge. And they decided to stand out from Street Fighter. They were going to use digitized graphics to make the game look a little more realistic. And they also made the fighters look a little bit bigger too, so it was bigger on the screen and more details could be shown. Now, originally, they wanted the game to be a team up with a famous movie star, kind of like Sega did in the beginning, where they teamed up with Michael Jackson. But they were looking for like action movie star. They were looking for Steven Seagal or Jean-Claude Van Damme, and both turned it down because they were working on movies at the time. So what this actually did was help them make Mortal Kombat. Like if they didn't turn this movie down, it would have been called like, I don't know, Jean-Claude Van Damme's Kick Out or something. I'm guessing.
Super punch 'em up.
Yeah, super roundhouse kick or whatever. And so
that's the Chuck Norris game.
Oh, that's a good point. That is totally Chuck Norris. I wonder if there's a Walker Texas Ranger game. Okay, it's a tangent. I don't want to go down that.
I'm on it.
I don't want to go down that road yet. So what ended up happening is it forced Tobias and Boon to make the mythology and universe of Mortal Kombat. And the character Johnny Cage is actually a parody of Jean-Claude Van Damme because they're like, we already kind of designed the game with that kind of character in mind. So they're like, well, Johnny Cage is essentially Jean-Claude Van Damme. One important thing to notice is that Tobias and Boon took from Street Fighter the hidden moves element of the game because that's what made Street Fighter so popular. But they made hidden moves even bigger. They had way more of them, as well as they had this little bonus Easter egg involving the character Reptile, which I didn't know Reptile was in Mortal Kombat 1, but he is. And the only way you can get Reptile, who, if you don't know, he's a green ninja that looks exactly like Scorpion, who's red, or Sub-Zero, who is blue. But you could only access a fight with Reptile in this creepy pit area if you did a certain pattern of flawless victories, fatalities, and if something randomly flew in front of the moon while you're on one level, that's what made it happen. And while it was super rare, it actually happened. And people found this, and it kind of created this buzz like, did you see the green guy, Reptile, that shows up? And people are like, dude, you're a liar. That's like a rumor. They're kind of creating their own internet buzz, essentially, before the internet.
My dad works at Mortal Kombat. He told me.
Yeah, right? It's the uncle at Nintendo sort of idea. Exactly like that. So what ended up happening with the game and what made it so controversial is fatalities. So fatalities were when a player beat someone in 2 rounds. It had to be 2 because it's best 2 out of 3. So in 2 rounds, the opponent would be dizzy, and then while they were dizzy, if you did a certain button combination, it would have a gruesome finishing move. The one I always remember is the one when Scorpion would pull out their spinal column and skull. That was like the famous one.
Oh, yeah.
But also it was like people would like punch through their bodies and grab their hearts out and things like that. And because of those digitized graphics, you could actually tell what was going on.
It looked super realistic.
Yeah,
I never got one of those things to work. I've tried. I remember like getting a list of what the combo things were and trying it. And I don't think I ever got one to work.
It was super hard. I remember it being super hard. And in the book, they even mentioned that a lot of times people would watch other people play Mortal Kombat hoping they knew those fatalities so they could learn from other people. Because this is before the internet or strategy guides. This is just a coin-op arcade game. There isn't even the port yet. The port, actually, we're about to talk about it, so I'll just start now, was made by Acclaim because Acclaim had the rights to any Bally Williams Midway title. So,
like the console rights?
Yeah, the console rights. They had a deal. So they actually put a lot of resources into marketing Mortal Kombat for console. They'd had $10 million in marketing campaign, and they had $40 million in inventory because they knew the game was going to be a hit. And it was. It was a huge hit. It was such a hit that they not only made it for Sega Genesis and SNES, but they also made it for Game Gear and Game Boy. And the Game Boy cartridge version of the game sold more than 1 million copies.
Wow.
I didn't even know.
That's a lot for a Game Boy game.
Yeah, I didn't even know Mortal Kombat 1 was for Game Boy. That's like straight up Pokemon levels, I feel like, too, of Game Boy cartridge sales. So
yeah, that's pretty high.
If you remember, Nintendo had a big problem, though, because of Mortal Kombat and their own licensing agreements. They did not like blood and gore in their games, and they actually stood by it and made Acclaim take out the blood and gore. And Acclaim was like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Because if you do this, Sega is going to outpace you, and we're in the middle of the console wars right now. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be really bad for you if you do this. But Nintendo stood to their guns. They're like, nope, we're making you take that stuff out. So there were no fatalities and no excess blood in the Nintendo SNES version of the game.
That just added to Sega's like weird, way edgier and cooler than Nintendo. Like Nintendo won't even let you have the gory, gross stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it totally, it was, they were right. Acclaim was 100% right. So Acclaim sold 6.5 million copies of the game in total. But the Sega Genesis version of Mortal Kombat outsold the SNES version nearly 3-1.
Woof.
So Nintendo also got lost in sales. And on top of that, they actually took a lot of flack from their own customers. Howard Lincoln mentions getting thousands of angry letters and calls to the helpline like, why did you sell me a game that's not the game in arcade? I wanted the game that was in the arcade. Why don't I just go buy a Genesis? What are you doing? You betrayed me, essentially. Like, it was the ultimate betrayal.
Wow.
So this all led, the creation of Mortal Kombat, all led to this big hearing. And this was the first ever major political battle on violence in video games. And it was the 1993 joint hearing that investigated marketing violent video games to minors. That was what it was called. So
they weren't so much worried about the content of the games in a vacuum. They were worried about it in the context of, are these games being sold to kids?
Yeah, or even marketed. Like, are the commercials for kids, or what is happening? Yeah,
sort of like how like you weren't like, I guess they were still doing cigarette ads in the 90s, but like you weren't allowed to target children with those ads. You couldn't buy them during commercial or during cartoons and things like that. This was sort of going along with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you can't have violence being shown on Nickelodeon, you know?
Right.
Don't try to sell this stuff to Nickelodeon kids. I mean, I felt like Nickelodeon was more of the bad boys compared to Disney, though, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. Nickelodeon was definitely a little bit edgier than...
I mean, they had Legends of the Hidden Temple, Guts, Global Guts, you know? I'm feeling Double Dare. Oh, that was so crazy. Man. But anyway, so off topic once again. So there are a lot of rumors as to why the hearing started. And there's 3 major rumors and then the official version. So the 3 rumors are, first, Sega and a company called Digital Pictures claim Nintendo brought it up because Sega was winning the console war. Oh. So Sega was winning in sales, and Nintendo's like, this will slow them down if we bring up this violence in video game topic. And Nintendo was like, hey, we're great. We have that third-party license thing. All our games are super sweet and lovable and wonderful. Have you seen Mario? He's adorable. It's great. Okay. And Yoshi? It's awesome. So that was that rumor. The second rumor was that Nintendo Director of Communications Perrin Kaplan started the debate when she gave a speech on violence in video games at the National Organization of Women in the fall of 1993. So they think that is what started the whole thing. And the third rumor is that Nintendo reps went to Washington, D.C. and secretly lobbied members of Congress by showing them tapes of violent Sega games to start something.
Oh, man. So they were confident that they could get public opinion on their side if they're like, hey, Sega's trying to sell your kids cigarettes, basically. And they thought they could get everybody on their side that way.
Oh,
and
100%.
Really slow Sega down.
Yeah, 100%. They thought they were like in the right. So those are the three rumors of how it started. The official reason it started is that Bill Anderson, who was the chief of staff to Senator Joseph Lieberman, who was a Democrat from Connecticut, told Lieberman that Bill Anderson's 9-year-old son wanted Mortal Kombat, but then when he looked into the game, it was super violent, and how could they sell this stuff to kids? And then Lieberman decided to investigate this on his own. And being a man of the people, I want to go make sure that kids aren't being corrupted by video games.
Of course.
So Lieberman, also, another game he found was that game Night Trap. Remember when we talked about interactive movie games? And
Yep.
Night Trap, if you don't know, we talked about it before, but it's an interactive movie for Sega CD where vampires are breaking into a house to kill girls in scantily clad outfits, to say the least, and you have to make sure the vampires don't attack the women by putting up these weird, like, Rube Goldberg machine-esque traps, like weird bells and levers, like a marble falls to the floor and then a net falls down on a vampire. I don't know, something like that. So you just click a stack of dominoes and it leads all the way through the house and then a trap. It's also really...
It's like a really long OK Go music video.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an
really
interactive...
good way to put it.
OK Go music video.
Some would say it's the original OK Go music video, actually.
Maybe.
I forgot about that. That's great. Lieberman then, to like build evidence after looking at Night Trap and looking at Mortal Kombat, he started finding surveys. And the survey said, this is just one survey, and it said the average player of a Sega Genesis was 7 to 12 years old.
It's pretty young for violent video games.
Yeah, and this made him come to the conclusion that Sega was marketing violence to children. But an important thing to note about this assumption is that only 10% of games on the home market were considered violent at this time. Now, we're going to get into it later where, well, what is violent and what isn't violent? Because we have some stuff from the hearing later that brings up this whole debacle. So... Okay, Lieberman, also important to note, completely denies the allegation that Howard Lincoln, VP at Nintendo, approached him. He says, no, Howard Lincoln had nothing to do with this. I did all this on my own. I found it. I started doing research. It's my own thing. So
he's trying to make sure that he gets credit for it.
It felt that way. I mean, again, this whole thing is going to seem, whatever side you fall on, very political in certain aspects, and it's hard for me because I definitely have an opinion on this and I'm trying not to state it, but we'll get to that at the end. So
we can get into that later.
Yeah, we can get into that later. But so Nintendo, Sega, and other game companies actually started feeling the heat when they knew that this thing was coming, that senators are looking into this, because they actually had no organization lobbying for them in Washington, D.C. at the time. Like, I mean, you look at like cigarette companies or big agricultural companies, they always have representatives in Washington, D.C. to help represent them when something comes up. And while there is a organization called the Software Publishers Association, they never helped video games out because they kind of looked down on video games as like the black sheep of the whole...
They were more serious
technological institute. Yeah, exactly. They're like, we want to talk about Microsoft Word. That's what they're all about. That's what, in my mind, they're all
useful things that advance society.
They're like, have you seen what you can do in Excel? So that's probably what they said at some point. So the hearings actually started on December 9th, 1993, and were brought about by not only Lieberman, but another senator named Herb Kohl. He was a Democrat of Wisconsin. And the first weird thing that happened, right off the bat, day one, they receive an open letter from a man named Bob Keeshan, also known as Captain Kangaroo. And he was a TV host of a kids show, Captain Kangaroo. I never watched it, but I know it exists. And he wrote an open letter stating how the software companies should understand their role in nurturing children. So kind of weird, but he brings up a point like, hey, you're responsible for all this. It's just really random that Captain Kangaroo decided to write this letter. That's
I
really
think
what
he
I got
probably
out of it.
has some experience with that. I'm sure he feels some of that burden himself as well as being a kids show. It's like you need to understand that when you make these things for kids that you you have a responsibility, right? Or you make these things that could be used by kids, you have a responsibility.
Oh, yeah. I actually remember I watched that Mr. Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And there's a part of it where he brings up video games and how they're essentially not the way kids should be educated, which, I mean, I get it. Like, I'm not opposed to that, you know? But it's just really, I think video games could be a valuable tool. Again, I'm getting into personal opinions. I got to pull away. But it's important to note because, yeah, it is a major education television show, one of the most popular at the time, sending a letter. But it's just a weird start. No one saw it coming. No one knew it was happening. He just sent the letter, and it was brought up at the very beginning. Also, a few hours before the hearing started, several manufacturers already said they were endorsing a rating system for games, including Sega, who already had their own in-house rating system.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing that they had a different rating thing going on their older games.
Yeah, they had a rating system in place, and they also had a helpline on the back of every game or on game ads that you could call to be like, hey, what's the rating of this game? What's it all about? I'm a parent. I just want to make sure it's okay for my kid. And they would tell you. And I'm pretty sure Nintendo had the same thing, too. They just didn't have a rating system. Like, I'm pretty sure you can call the Nintendo hotline and be like, hey, is Super Mario Brothers too violent? And they'd be like, no, it's great. And you'd be like, okay, that's probably how it went down.
Yeah.
So that's important to note, too. Right away, they're already kind of seeing the answer is a rating system. So the way the hearing worked is there was a panel of industry executives and there was a panel of experts. And the experts were psychologists and education experts. And here's a rundown of who they are and what they said. So the first person on and they are the expert for the education and psychologists, by the way. This is all of them in order, and then I'll get to the industry people later. So Parker Page was the president of Children's Television Resource, and he cited the limited research on this subject in the early 90s, but he did have 3 recommendations for the industry. And the first one was the federal government should do their own independent research on this subject because there's just not enough information, and they should also formulate a way to rate games. The second was that future advertising should reinforce these ratings. Like, everyone in gaming needs to get on board and appreciate this rating system. And the third is a voluntary industry-wide cap should be placed on how much violence is allowed in games. So essentially they should be like, are beheadings okay? And then everyone's like, no. And they're like, okay, video games agree, no more beheadings. That's what he wanted to happen. Next was a man named Dr. Eugene Provenzo Jr., and he wrote a very critical book of the gaming industry titled Video Kids, Making Sense of Nintendo. So already, this guy is not into games, and he claimed that all video games are overwhelmingly violent, sexist, and racist. And that's a quote from him.
Wow, all video games.
All video games are overwhelmingly violent, sexist, and racist. And he said
all of them are overwhelmingly even.
Yeah.
Wow, he just really doesn't pull punches, I guess.
Yeah, he went for it. And this is from his book, because he talks about his book at the hearing, where he said that of the 47 most popular games, violence was the main theme. And he found these games by looking at Nintendo Power Polls and other stuff to be like, okay, these are the games that are most popular, like sales records, Nintendo Power Polls of what's the hottest game at the time. And he claimed that of 47 most popular games, violence was the main theme. And he said that games, and I'm kind of breaking this down here based on what I read in the book and I'm very much summarizing this. If you want to know more about it, you should definitely read this chapter in the book because it goes into way more detail of all of these people and what they said. And I'm kind of trying to give a summary of it, but for the sake of time. And he said that games were racist, and the example he used is kids in a game, if they fought ninjas, they would associate all Asian people as ninjas, and they were therefore bad. He said it's just the way child psychology works, and how their brains put things, like categorize things and put them together. That's what he was claiming. Whether you agree with it or disagree, that's what he was saying. So next, Robert Chase of the National Education Association warned about the instinct to censor material. So he was very much like, hey, we got to be careful about what we censor. But at the same time, he said that video games actually encourage violence as a resolution to conflict, because a kid would look at Mortal Kombat, for example, and be like, well, we got to fight this out to the death. Like, it's the only way.
They didn't even try talking about it first. So.
And then he also said it was even worse because Mortal Kombat, not only do you fight someone and you win, but then you're rewarded with this crazy fatality. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I don't even know of that many kids that could probably pull off those fatalities because apparently they're really hard to do at the time because they don't really give you instruction.
Nobody knew about them.
Yeah. So again, now I'm arguing with people I read about in a book. Okay. So
from 30 years ago.
From 30 years ago. So, oh gosh, it's 30 years ago. That's crazy to think about too. Marilyn Draws was the last person on the panel, and she was the VP of the National Coalition on Television Violence. And she says that video games did what movies did, where they confuse kids' desires for action with violence. So kids actually want to just see action. They want to see stuff happen. But Hollywood takes action as violence, and so they just show a bunch of violence. And that actually became a big sticking point of the whole hearing, this whole action versus violence debate. And a big thing to note about the hearing, they only really covered the games Night Trap and Mortal Kombat. They didn't touch anything else. And a lot of people think that because those were two games that had very realistic images. Like Night Trap was essentially a movie you were playing. So it's film. You can see these people. They're real people. And the digitalized graphics of Mortal Kombat made it look way more real. So that's why they're thinking those two games were the only two sources cited. Also, they didn't really get the whole plot of Night Trap because they kept coming to this scene where a woman is killed by vampires in lingerie, but they don't mention the fact that the player is there to save the women from the vampires by doing these traps. So it's kind of misconstrued. But then...
Well, that scene is like, it means you lose, right? It means you did it wrong. So
it means
it's not supposed to be your reward. It's supposed to be a, hey, you lost. This is bad. Here's what happens when you lose.
Yeah, and when Marilyn Draws was told that, she said, that's not important because now what they're seeing is if you fail, women are killed, and it's still your fault that they're dead. And I'm like, okay, I understand that argument. That's what Marilyn Draws said. So now that was the whole expert panel. The industry panel was weird. It got very weird. And the reason it got weird is because of two people on that panel. Howard Lincoln, who was at the time the VP at Nintendo of America, and Bill White, who was the VP of Sega of America. And it's important to note that those two had history because Bill White got let go, not let go. He left Nintendo, but it was not a good breakup. It was a very bad breakup when he left Nintendo to go to Sega. So there's already some contention there. But the
might be out for blood here a little bit. It might be out for some revenge.
Howard Lincoln's not happy with Bill White. So the first thing that happened is Howard Lincoln spoke first, and he just kept talking about how, hey, Nintendo's third-party licensing deals actually protected us from this. We told them to edit Mortal Kombat, and we took all the stuff out of there. And look how great Nintendo is, and we're so awesome, and we're the best at what we do. And actually, it worked. Like, Joseph Lieberman he was kind of throwing up softball questions to Howard Lincoln, and he kept praising Howard Lincoln and Nintendo for their work and being like, oh, you guys are doing a great job. You actually did fix these games that we're complaining about. And Night Trap also was not available on Super Nintendo. It was not there. You couldn't
mostly
play it.
For technical reasons.
Yeah, because it was a CD. It wasn't a cartridge game. Now, Bill White came up, and he was in the hot seat. He was the VP of Sega of America, like I said before, and his three lines of defense were Sega inherently had an older audience. I think he said that Sega CD owners were usually all 22 or older. Oh, and only, I want to say, I'm going off of memory. I didn't write this down, but I'm going from what I remember in the book, that I think he said less than 10% of Sega CD users were under the age of 12 or 13. It was not a lot of people. So he said that Sega had an older audience and that Sega's in-house rating system they had actually helped this problem. So they were doing mature games, but they had their own rating system. They had solved this problem already. And they also said that they 100% agree and think that everyone should adopt an industry-wide rating system, but not only any industry-wide rating system, their industry-wide rating system.
Well, they already did all the work.
Yeah, they're like, hey, we already did it. You guys should just join our rating system, and then this whole problem would be solved. And him saying this really made Howard Lincoln mad. He just made him super mad because he knew that Bill White was at Nintendo when they were looking at numbers of demographics, because there was a way they could pull demographics, it said in the book, from warranty returns, because you had to state your age on who bought the console or who played it. Mm-hmm. And then also they had some sales figures, so they could actually see the demographics of how old people were when they were buying the console. So when it got to Howard Lincoln in the QA portion, he pretty much just laid into Bill White, saying he definitely knew that the market still had a lot of kids in it because Bill White used to work at Nintendo. He knows that Nintendo's whole base is children, and the whole thing is awkward because of this past at Nintendo, and also because Lieberman was definitely throwing up softballs still in the rebuttal part of the Q&A. Just again, like, hey, I know this doesn't affect you because, you're Howard Lincoln and Nintendo is great and all. And so he just kind of made it an environment where Lincoln was, and essentially the senators at the hearing were ganging up on Bill White at Sega, mostly because they came out with Night Trap and Mortal Kombat. The dirty version of Mortal Kombat, I should say. Mm-hmm. So they then battled
Uncensored, Parental Advisory Edition.
That's right. So the Fatality Edition. So they then battled back and forth a couple times. Like, Bill White kept stressing the rating system, and Lincoln kept saying the ratings wouldn't keep them out of the hands of children. Like, parents would just buy them for their kids anyway. They need to just all outright censor it together. And the back and forth really helped keep this Sega Nintendo console war alive. We talked about console wars last episode, but this was very much going at the time, and it was alive and well. And also, the whole thing was aired on C-SPAN twice, so everyone in the video game industry was watching these hearings on C-SPAN, and it was such a hot topic at the time that full and clips of the productions were played on CNN also of the hearing. So everyone watched this thing, and if you didn't watch it on C-SPAN, you saw clips of it on CNN. It was definitely talked about in the 24-hour news cycle, if there really was that.
Everybody knew what was going on
in 1994. Maybe it was still like a 14-hour news cycle or something in 1994. Not 24 hours yet, but it was still there.
There was a time when news channels just went off the air at like 9 p.m. and didn't come back until like 6 a.m.
And it was totally fine. Some would say it was a better time.
Some would say that.
So this whole thing kept the Sega Nintendo console war alive, and it kept it going even after these hearings. It's going to keep going. So the first hearing adjourned at 1:52 p.m., and they decided to do a follow-up hearing to take place 3 months later. And that hearing that happened, which was on March 4th, 1994, was a lot different. Mostly because an entire new rating system, which we're going to talk about in a second, was in place and agreed upon, and it was not Sega's. Howard Lincoln was at this point made the chairman of Nintendo of America, making him for the first time at the same rank and equal to President Minoru Arakawa at Nintendo of America. So they're now colleagues.
Ooh, okay.
Arakawa is no longer Howard Lincoln's boss. And the third thing that happened, Night Trap sold out everywhere across the country.
Oh, the classic Streisand effect.
That's right. So actually, until the hearing, no one in America really had Sega CD. I think they only sold 250,000, which is not a lot for at the time. That's based on how many Genesises there are, because there's
probably
Genesis.
Basically everybody who had a Sega CD, probably.
Yeah, really. I mean, Genesis was everywhere. So Night Trap would have just disappeared into obscurity if not for this hearing. And it was so popular that it actually came out on PC and another system called 32X.
Oh man, that would happen later too, when they would talk about like rap music, and I think Eminem gets used as a like an example in a similar kind of situation in government, and like Eminem records just flew off the shelves after that.
Oh yeah, I remember that. The Marshall Mathers.
Yeah,
no,
like that's what you want, is to get discussed as an example of something positive or negative. It doesn't really matter. People are going to buy your thing if you're discussed in that way of like being so controversial.
Oh yeah, that's the I'm Slim Shady, I'm the real Shady. That whole music video era phase.
Yep.
Fun music videos though. As a freshman in high school, I was very much into the whole music videos of that. I just watched a lot of music videos. Okay, now Tyler, I think you're going to talk about the two organizations that were formed after these hearings, right?
Yeah, so there were two of them that were set up after the hearings, two organizations. So in 1994, Nintendo, Sega, Acclaim, Electronic Arts, Philips, Atari, and 3DO all had these like secret meetings over the course of about 6 weeks. What they wanted to do was create their own version of the Software Publishers Association, because remember the SPA was like kind of hanging out with the video game people, but sort of looking down on them, and so these groups or these companies all got together and they were like, you know what? We can just make our own. So they made a group called the IDSA, or the Interactive Digital Software Association. So this group, this like consortium, was the lobbying arm in Washington, D.C., and it was led by a Washington, D.C. veteran known as Douglas Lowenstein. So that's the first group that was put together in order to sort of lobby for video games in Washington, D.C., so they had somebody advocating on their behalf. The second organization that was formed, and this one will be a lot more familiar to folks, was the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB. This was yeah, so now we didn't use Sega's. Sega was like, hey, we have this whole rating system that we developed. Maybe everybody should use that. And everybody else got together and they were like, nah, we're going to make a different one, even though it was basically more or less the same. But the cool thing about the ESRB was it was an independent organization led by the highly respected educator, Dr. Arthur Pober. The ESRB was loved by Lieberman and Cole, those senators that were kind of given some grief because they liked it mostly because it was independent. So it was set up by these companies, but it wasn't beholden to any of them. So it would operate in like an impartial manner.
Yeah, which is exactly what that first expert wanted. If I remember correctly, yeah, because Page, he wanted that. He wanted them to have he wanted a government organization, but instead having, as long as Parker Page, as long as it was independent, I think that was the most important part, because you can't have games checking on themselves. They just try to sell stuff.
That's right. So it was independent. The only struggle was getting computer game makers to switch over from the rating system that was created by the IDSA. So there was some work that had to be done there, especially because in the world of computers, you're not beholden to any like hardware manufacturers. So like Nintendo can say, hey, we won't give you a license unless you rate your games using the ESRB. And that's what they do. Nintendo, Sega, all those, even to this day, like you can't release a game on a console without getting it rated. But on computers, you don't have that problem. There's nobody to get permission from. So not every game needs to get rated. And so that was kind of one of the hard things, is like getting computer game manufacturers to move on to it. These days, they largely have done it. Occasionally, there's like indie games that don't get rated, and that's okay. But yeah, so that was the only really hard thing. So here's a funny thing. When Mortal Kombat 2 came out, they still had the fatalities, and it actually did have those on the Super Nintendo also, because now they had a rating system. They could safely say, hey, if you buy this, you know what you're getting. We'll allow the fatalities in here. So if you don't want fatalities, don't buy this game. So they had the fatalities in there, but they also had what they called friendships.
I love this.
Instead of like a gory finishing move, the players would give the others a cake or a present that said friendship on it. So it was kind of like a poking fun at the hearings. Ed Boon and John Tobias, the guys that made Mortal Kombat, they kind of worked that fun thing in there. So that's cool. Also important to note, due to the hearings, the Super Nintendo we already talked about that. So it's fine.
The important thing too is also to note about the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat 2 is because it was fully gory, they outsold Sega this time.
Oh, yeah.
That was the big thing about it. Yeah, they outsold Sega's version of Mortal Kombat 2, which I thought was pretty
interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, in an even playing field, Nintendo prevailed.
Well, that's got to feel pretty good for Howard Lincoln and
peeps. I mean, I feel bad for Bill White because I feel like he was thrown to the wolves at that hearing. It really felt like that way. So, okay, now the book kind of just ends there with violence in video games. We might get to little bits of it later, but I wanted to talk about the now, as they say, because there's definitely still censorship in games now. And when I think of censorship in games, I 100% think of Australia. Mm-hmm. Because they have a system there called classification, and it's how they really monitor all media. It's not just video games, but due to the nature of video games, a lot of the time they're just caught in the crossfire, and they'll either get really, really crazy stiff ratings or they'll just get banned outright. So their rating system, they have R18+, that's their version of mature, according to the ESRB. Mm-hmm. And it was created actually so they would not ban too many games, because the system before would have made it so all these games would have been banned. Which is
like if it just passes a certain threshold, it's like it's out, and so they created sort of a more
they actually
nuanced scale.
Yeah, they actually loosened it up just to make sure these games could come out. And I mean, the big one that I learned about Australia's lost one was GTA, because Grand Theft Auto, I think starting with Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City had it as well. They really did not like the part where you would pick up a prostitute and then you could kill the prostitute and get your money back. So what they actually ended up doing is they didn't ban GTA. They did just make an altered version of the game where you couldn't do that. Now, I don't know if they just took the whole prostitute thing out of the game. I think they made it so they couldn't be killed afterward. I'm pretty sure that's how they altered the game. But to ban a game in Australia, they have some guidelines that they must break. And I found this off of Wikipedia, so take it as you will. But here are the guidelines of what they could do.
If a game has these things in it, it's not cool in Australia.
It's not cool in Australia, and they have full license to ban the game. So here we go. Okay. First, detailed instruction or promotion in matters of crime or violence. Second, depiction of rape. Third, the promotion or provision of instruction in pedophile activity. 4, descriptions or depictions of child sexual abuse or any other exploitive or offensive descriptions or depictions involving a person who is or appears to be a child under 18 years old. 5, gratuitous, exploitive, or offensive depictions of violence with a very high degree of impact, which are excessively frequent, prolonged, or detailed. Cruelty of real violence, which are very detailed or which have an extremely high impact, or sexual violence. So 6, depictions or practices such as bestiality. 7, gratuitous, exploitive, or offensive depictions of 1, activity accompanied by fetishes or practices that are offensive or abhorrent, incest fantasies or other fantasies that are offensive or abhorrent, and that is all of them. Now, the thing that stood out to me, these are like so many games have little bits of these. So how do they judge what they ban or don't ban? And I pulled up a list of games they have banned, and there's a pattern with a lot of these games. And
okay.
So I just pulled some of the more well-known ones. There were other games on there too that you may or may not have heard of, but I just pulled some ones that were a little bit more popular. So the first game was 50 Cent Bulletproof, and that game was banned because of high-impact bloody violence. But then they released a censored version of the game that was MA-15. That was that's what they did with that game. Okay, so then also the game that was banned too was Blitz the League, which I thought was interesting. The
newer
football
NFL Blitz. I guess it's not that new anymore, but it's the newest.
It came out in 2007, and it was banned because of drug use related to incentives and rewards, and that comes up a lot. Like, they do not like it when you use drugs as a way to incentivize play. So, which also made me kind of think about Fallout, because in the game's Fallout, you have like Jet, or what are some other drugs in there? I know Jet's one of them, but
in Elder Scrolls, you got like skooma.
Oh yeah, skooma. Yeah, that's right. Or moon sugar. So
yeah,
those are kind of given to players, and they can actually boost your stats. So that's kind of a positive reason to have drugs. Like, that's a reward for drugs in a video game, but they're not listed on this thing, so I don't know how they got around that. South Park, The Stick of Truth was banned because of a scene in which I think it's Cartman gets probed by an alien, or one of the characters does, and that was a sexual act towards a minor, is how they put that in there. And then what they did is they altered the game to make it so when you get to that part, a little slide comes up that said, this part was banned in Australia, and then it just skips it and moves on. So they re-released the game. Saints Row 4 was banned, and that game was banned because of implied sexual violence and drug use related to incentives and rewards. Again, you get drugs for doing something in the game. And then an appeal was lodged, but that failed. Through the content involving sexual violence was overturned. The drug use was not overturned. And then what they did is they released an edited version of the game where they took out a mission called Alien Narcotics, and that's how they got around it. So the last game I have, or last two games I have, are Silent Hill Homecoming and Witcher 2, but it's pretty much the same thing, where there was a torture scene in Silent Hill. They got rid of that tortured scene or censored it, and then it came out with an MA-15 rating. And then in The Witcher 2, it was banned because sexuality and nudity was in the game in relation to incentives and rewards. And then they just edited a side quest out of the game where instead of where you are supposed to choose sex as a reward for this side quest, you automatically turn it down.
Oh, okay.
So it was like a dialogue choice, and they just got out. So if you'll notice, the big pattern with Australia is they ban a game, it gets censored or edited, and the game comes out. So what happens in Australia is I don't think a lot of games are actually banned outright. I think what ends up happening is these games are banned, and then they're very much delayed while a company fixes them. The studio fixes them, and then they come out at a much later date, which is why you'll see Australia get games 3 or 6 months later than America. It's a big problem there. I know there was some YouTube streamers I was watching from Australia, and they complain about it all the time because they get games way later. And I feel like a lot of them eventually move to the United States just because it's easier. But
yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what happens in Australia. So they have censorship. They don't ban games outright, but they ban them and then alter them and then they re-release. So China also has some stuff you were saying. Is it kind of the same thing because the state has to look at the game, right?
Yeah. So every piece of every video game, as far as I know, it might be every piece of media in China, but I think every video game has to go through like a government sort of certification process, which is really vague, and you don't really know what you're getting into in this certification process. But the government can just straight up, like before your game comes out, it can just straight up like give you the axe and say, no, you can't be here. So what happens a lot of times is video games that have like skeletons or zombies or depictions of the undead or things like that, they will remove those kinds of things, lots of blood too. They'll remove those kinds of things from the game when they go to release it in China, because the Chinese government often looks for reasons to ban games, like especially if they're not Chinese-made games, if they're coming from other countries, they'll look for reasons to sort of ban them. So they cut those kinds of things out. So a lot of games nowadays that are released in a lot of places at once, I know World of Warcraft is kind of like this. They'll have either different versions that release in China, similar to Australia, or they'll just avoid it altogether in all their versions. And that's just like something that happens in China. One other thing that comes to mind here, do you remember the hot coffee controversy for Grand Theft Auto San Andreas?
No, what's that?
So in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, it's rated M for mature, but there's a like a thing where you can like go on dates with women, and then you bring them back to your apartment, and or you take them home, and like maybe they invite you up, maybe not, based on like how the date went, and then it's sort of implied that like if you go up to their room, like that stuff happens. One thing that was in the game, but later it was removed pretty early on, was like a mini game where you did all kinds of acts, explicit acts, and it wasn't actually in the game on release, but the mini game was still in the game's code. So if you had either a mod for the PC version or Game Shark codes for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions, you could activate this mini game and play it. And it was like really unfinished and like clearly not meant to be in the game. But because of that, there was like all kinds of, I think that there might have been hearings on it. I don't remember exactly. I'm sort of recalling this off the top of my head. I should have done some research on it, but it just popped in. What they ended up doing was, so they would later re-release the game with that completely cut out of the game's, like all of it removed from the game, even inaccessible, even with cheat codes. But I remember this, what they did, but while they were still shipping these new like modified versions of this game out, they sent stickers to all of the major retailers to put on their copies of the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas that was still on the shelves that made it rated A for adults. And so, which is really weird. Companies like Walmart, well, a lot of companies will straight up not carry AO games. Like that's just a rule that they have for themselves, that they just don't do it.
I'm pretty sure Walmart also had a rule where they wouldn't carry parental advisory CDs I don't know if that's still a fact, like a rule, but they would only have edited CDs. I remember this when I was in high school because I would try to get CDs at Walmart and they would all be the edited versions. And I'm like, I'm not going to get the edited version. I'm crazy.
I think they may still do something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do
my
remember
impression
there
of
being like
18-year-old me.
Yeah, there's like a Walmart version of a lot of songs that like is the edited version. They also did this with Elder Scrolls Oblivion. There was a similar kind of deal where there was this stuff in the game that was inaccessible unless you got a mod, and then it was like there. So like it's technically on the disc, even though you're not supposed to be able to get to it. I think it was like a topless model or something like that. But they did the same thing. They didn't actually, well, no, they did re-release a version of it without that, but the game was upgraded from a teen rating to an M rating. And they actually never got downgraded. Even after they released the modified version, they never downgraded it. But so if they did the same thing where they sent stickers around to major retailers so they could put it over the teen rating on Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Yeah, I just remember that happening.
So while you were talking about that, I actually remembered something too. And you ready to talk about this right now? The Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 level, No Russia?
Oh, yeah, No Russian.
Where No Russian, where you shoot up an airport, essentially. Take part in an airport shooting, and
you're like an undercover. You're like undercover with the terrorists or something.
Yeah, you're undercover. I think you work for the CIA, I want to say. And it's one of those missions where you die at the end of it, which Call of Duty likes to do, which blew my mind when I first played it. When I think was it which one? I think it's actually Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, where you're in the nuclear attack and you die. And
that's the first Modern Warfare. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare.
Oh, Call of Duty 4. Okay, so. But yeah, so this mission is called No Russian, and it was actually banned in Russia. It was the graphic content was just the level was just edited out of the whole game. It just skipped it.
Yeah,
and
it's still. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, so a lot of it was definitely like considered poor taste at the time because this was right following the 2009 Fort Hood shooting. So this came out right after that. But it was definitely like, I remember this being like, how is this in a video game and it's okay? And that's me playing it when I'm usually just like, whatever flies, like whatever you want to do, let them do their thing. But it was definitely a big deal and it was banned.
Yeah.
That mission was, I think, edited out or it just became a cutscene, I think, in some of them too. Yeah, it was
maybe.
It was definitely, because this is also the height of like, when terrorism was just on everyone's minds too, so it still is. When you start the game, if you start a new campaign, it's like, hey, so there's a level in this game that like a lot of people aren't cool with. You want to just skip it when the time comes, and you're given the option right there to like just not even deal with that. I think is also it says here you are an undercover CIA agent, and you actually have the option to not shoot anyone the whole mission. You can just walk through the airport. So I think that was one of the things that Call of Duty, Activision. This would have been not Treyarch. This would be, what's the other company that makes them? Wow, I can't believe
it was Infinity Ward.
Infinity Ward, that's
Warfare
it.
2.
Yeah, they make the Modern Warfares, and then Treyarch makes Black Ops. So I think this was Infinity Ward also being like, well, you don't have to shoot anyone in the whole mission. You can go through. So, but the level is really graphic. You could hear like people screaming, and I remember being very unsettled after playing that level. It definitely jarred me. But it's, again, if they put this in the level, and I don't think it's in there for shock value. I think they wanted to kind of up the stakes of being like, hey, this is what's going on in this story, and it's like kind of used as a plot device. But again, trying to take my personal opinion out of it. But yeah. So, but I just remembered this when you mentioned that other stuff. I was like, oh, what about this Call of Duty airport level? I remember this being like really jarring when I played it. So, also, it's important to note that this level leaked. I didn't know that. People found out about it before
the game came out.
Yeah, I had no idea. I played it fresh and I was just like, whoa, that's crazy. So also we should talk about Germany too, because they have a law about no Nazi imagery in any game, which makes Wolfenstein just
super weird
in that country. Yeah.
They recently relaxed that. Like, by recently, I mean like a few months ago. They sort of were like, okay, maybe it's okay. Germany has obviously they're very sensitive to their past, and they don't really like being reminded of it in video games. So, if you had like a game like Wolfenstein, which is definitely all about like killing Nazis and stuff, like those games get heavily censored, especially a lot of World War II games get heavily censored there too.
Like Call of Duty World War II, and you're not going to have any Nazi imagery in it. I'm interested to
Yeah.
see what happens in Battlefield 5 and how they do that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like they relaxed their restrictions, so it might be different now.
Also, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think it was around the time Wolfenstein 2 came out. They were like, okay, maybe it's okay. We can do this.
I was going to say, because, Battlefield 1 was very into historical accuracy and having these codex entries on everything so you could actually learn the history of World War I. And if they're going to carry that with World War II, with Battlefield 5, or V, I guess, if you want to look at it as like victory, then...
V for victory.
Yeah, then they're going to have to include some Nazi imagery in some way, shape, or form. So, but if they relax it, then good for Germany. So... But I mean, I guess we could talk about our personal feelings about it. I think I've made myself pretty clear that I think publishers should be allowed to do what they want to do. But at the same time, making a game specifically for the purpose of being like, oh, look at what I can do. It has to have context. Like I felt like that airport mission, No Russian, had context to the story. So that's why it was there, you know.
I agree.
But I don't think people should just be making things for the sake of making things and being offensive. I think they have to be legitimized in the narrative of the game, you know, because I want to hear a good story. That's just what I play video games for. So speaking of which, what have you been playing, Tyler?
Oh man, so obviously still playing Destiny. Got my shirt for Age of Triumph for Destiny.
Yeah.
Mike and I, you guys can't see this, Mike and I are both wearing our shirts proudly right now. We became legend and we got shirts.
I feel
Let's
like
say
a
how
legend right
legendary
now.
we are.
I feel
Same.
like David Bowie in the movie Legend. Was that him? Was he in that one? Or no, that's Labyrinth. Oh no, I failed.
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
have seen
to
Legend though.
I'm going to have to beep out this whole segment. I'm just kidding. So no one knows that I screwed up. Legends with Tom Cruise. Right?
Yeah, it's like his first movie, isn't it?
Oh, that's weird. I remember that. That's crazy. That was like long. I don't think I've ever seen that all the way through. I think I've only seen bits and pieces of it. But yeah. We became legend.
We became legend. We got our t-shirts. So I've still, of course, been playing Destiny, really digging Forsaken still. That's just going to be a staple of my life. Same with World of Warcraft. It's hard to juggle two sort of MMO style games. World of Warcraft, I'm starting to fizzle out a little bit. I did the raid. I did it in Raid Finder, which is like not really the same as doing the raid because it's like a super easy version where they just match you with 20 other people and there's like, I don't know, go and burn these bosses down with no real challenge or mechanics. But so I did it. I know what the bosses are. I want to do it on normal at least before I sort of call it quits. I want to have the World of Warcraft raiding experience, but I'm kind of, I don't know. I just gotten to the point where I'm like, well, I'm really only playing to get higher level gear at this point, and I'm not sure if I'm truly enjoying myself, but that's the way it goes. I also started up yesterday the new Spider-Man game on PlayStation 4.
I want to hear all about it.
Oh man, this game, what the people say online about it is true. It's very good. Swinging feels great. Like doing the missions and then getting like experience and leveling up and upgrading and unlocking new abilities is really, really fun. It does have that kind of Ubisoft open world thing where it's just like, go get the tower. And then when you get the tower, it's going to put all these icons on your map for stupid stuff you need to do. So it has that, like kind of like an Assassin's Creed, if Spider-Man were in an Assassin's Creed game. Although I have to say it doesn't feel like busy work. Like I'm going around getting all the backpacks, which is just the like go here and push a button and you got the thing, right? But I really like getting the backpacks because they all have like so the idea is Peter Parker's been Spider-Man for about 8 years now. He's not in high school anymore, but when he was in high school, he would often have to go save the world or save New York. And so he would just toss his backpack and sort of stick it to the wall, right? And then he'd leave it there and it would just stay there forever. And so now going back and finding all these backpacks, you get to see what was in his backpack at the time. And so there are things like, the menu from the first date he took Mary Jane on, or it's just stuff like that. Like, oh man, this kid, I saved his dog or something and he drew a picture for me and like I left it in my backpack. And so it's like, I love finding these little things inside the backpacks, which is really fun.
Cool little story things. That's cool. Little widgets.
Yeah.
Story widgets?
Yeah.
Sure. I just
They're
created a
little
term.
story widgets. Little bits of lore because it like I said, it is like pretty, it's like he's been Spider-Man for a while. This isn't like an origin story. We know what Uncle Ben's dead, his parents are gone. We know all that stuff. So this is sort of how they can kind of fill in a little bit of backstory without having to be super explicit about it. So I really, really enjoy the backpacks. And there's like 50 of them in the whole game. So there's not a whole lot, but Yeah, it's fun. Web swinging is just great. And I haven't done too much of the story yet because I've been too busy getting backpacks.
I've heard
yeah.
I just heard it's amazing. It just makes you feel like Spider-Man. Like, do you ever play it and then you stop playing it and then you touch the wall just to see if you stick or not, to see if you actually are Spider-Man? That's what I would do.
Yep.
That feels nice. I have been playing Minecraft again because my friend got the Realm thing where it's a month free trial. We didn't pay for it. Where he got the month free trial where we all have a shared world that we could just go into without someone else hosting us. And it's fun because it makes it so that I can go into a world and mess with it when my friends aren't there. And then when they come back, I screw something up. And it usually involves me just wrecking their buildings, like putting just random sand blocks in their buildings or drawing very inappropriate things out of blocks and putting it in the buildings. Or it's also fun to just fill an entire building with sand. So when they try to come back into it, it's just filled with sand. It's just a way to prank your friends. But I played that for like 3 or 4 hours probably this week total. And it was because when I used to play Minecraft, it was on Xbox 360 with my friends. We were all just like out of college and we were playing it just every night, making our dumb little towns or whatever. And it's like the feeling of adult Legos that I really enjoy. And that's why I like Minecraft. So having the Realms thing kind of brought me back in. And they changed the game a lot. They've added this whole like coral reef aquatic thing that's pretty nuts. And it's been pretty fun.
That's great.
So yeah, well, you know what? I want to read a review. We got another review.
Oh, yes.
I love it. If you would like to, you could rate and review and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast or Stitcher or Google Play. I think we're on all three, but a review really helps us out. And we got a new one, and this one is from Shiverino, which is a great name. It really rolls off the tongue. And it says longer is the title. It says, good listen. Just wish the episodes were longer. 5 stars. Thank you so much, Shiverino. And if you'll notice, we're at 56 minutes on this episode, and it's for you, Shiverino. We're doing a longer episode.
We went long on this one.
We went long on this one because we had a lot to talk about, and I feel like we were trying to definitely do a whole episode on the history of violence in video games, and the book covers that hearing, which is a great starting point, but I really wanted to talk about these other intricacies of stuff that have come back in modern day, because we're getting close to the end of the book, and
we're getting there, yeah.
We're going to start researching everything ourselves, and it's going to get sloppy, I think, at times. So you know what, Shiverino, we might have some longer episodes coming up. a little more Legend Labyrinth tangents, but I appreciate the 5 stars. Thank you for reviewing us. And I don't want it to ever be too long. I think we can both agree on that, but we definitely we don't mind having an episode run an hour. I just don't want to really go over an hour. That's just kind of my own personal preference. For what I would want to listen to. I don't want to listen to a 2-hour podcast. That sounds exhausting. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to the episode. As always, you can get at Tyler on Twitter at SneakerElf, ELPH. You can get at Mecoletta, MECOLETTA. You can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Again, the ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated, and we thank you so much for that, if you'd be willing to do that. And also just tell your friends about our fun podcast.
Yeah.
It's a labor of love, you know? That's what we're doing it for. So, and with that, anything you want to add, Tyler?
Nope, that's it. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This has been a Potaholics Comedy Network presentation. Potaholics.com